You are watching Fugitive Red Eye, and welcome to another episode of Random Thoughts. Today's episode, I'm going back to a more focused topic, and today I will be talking about different types of villains, and which ones are better. I'm going to kind of be weighing the pros and cons of each type of villain, because I don't think there is just one definitive answer. First off, I'll name what four types of villains there are. There's the relatable villain. These villains are likable and relatable and do what they do for what they consider to be a good reason. These villains are pretty much as close as you can get to an anti-hero without actually being an anti-hero. The second type of villain is comical villains. These are villains that aren't necessarily relatable, and in most cases are in fact wholly unrelatable, but they're hilarious and they make you enjoy watching them. The third type is the badass villain, a villain that once again isn't necessarily relatable, but you think they're cool because they're badass. And finally, we have the despicable or hateable villain. Those villains that really make you hate them. They have no redeeming qualities, and you just want to see them die. Now let's talk about the relatable villain. I think the best example of a relatable villain is Obito from Naruto Shippuden. There will be spoilers here, more spoilers rather. So without further ado, let me get right into this. So, Obito, he lost the one woman he cared about. And he was left presumed dead. He was taken in by someone who would give him hope, make him think he could create a world where the woman he cared about was still alive. And thus, he decides to create that world himself. He wants to create a world, albeit fake, where everyone is happy all the time. But the thing is it wouldn't be real. So, of course, people are not just going to sit by and take that shit. Now let's talk about some of the pros of this type of villain. This makes the villain more relatable and likable, and honestly makes it sometimes hard to root against them. With a relatable villain, sometimes it leaves it kind of open for you to determine whether or not they're actually the villain. In Obito's case, I think it's pretty clear he is the villain, but there are other examples that are more neutral. But if it's wholly neutral, then it's not really a villain, is it? It's more left open for interpretation. Now, some of the bad parts of this is, as I mentioned, it makes it harder to root against these villains, and although that's a good thing, if they do eventually get their comeuppance, it makes you sad. And while I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, that can be looked upon as a con if you don't like being sad. Now let's talk about the second type of villain, the comical villain. A couple of great examples for this are Freddy Krueger and Chucky. Both of these characters are horrible people. I mean, they're serial killers, for fuck's sake. But in the sequels to their respective movies especially, they become a lot more comical and laughable. They're entertaining. They're wisecracking, they're funny. So that makes you like them. To kind of go over the pros, let's talk about that. The pros, they're definitely enjoyable. You know, they're hilarious, they're funny. The cons, I think that really they're kind of, they can't be taken as seriously as a more serious villain. So let's move on to the third type of villain, the badass villain. Again, similar to the comical ones, these villains are not always relatable. The best example I can think of, in sticking with the slasher genre, as I did with the last one, Jason Voorhees. There are other great examples, but Jason is a good one to go off of, just because the only reason you like him is because of how badass he is to see kill people. The pros to this type of villain is it's cool, it's fun to watch. The cons, not always as satisfying when they get defeated, especially when it's something like Jason Voorhees or Michael Myers, where they always come back. To be fair, the same could be said about Freddy Krueger or Freddy Krueger or Chucky. So on to the final type of villain, and in some ways I think the best. The hateable villain, or despicable villain. Villains that you are absolutely made to hate. They have no redeeming qualities, they don't care about human life, and they show no mercy to anyone. A prime example of this, I think, is a couple of things. Number one, the captain on Pan's Labyrinth, and Joffrey from Game of Thrones. I will go into each a little bit, just because I think this is a very interesting topic. The captain from Pan's Labyrinth is shown to be a heartless, self-centered person. He's a fascist dictator, to be fair, so what do you expect? But there was one scene in particular when I first saw Pan's Labyrinth, which was years ago when I was a kid, But it's a scene where he's talking to these villagers, who he presumes to be revolutionaries, when they tell him they're simple hunters. It's a father and a son, and the captain beats the son brutally to death in front of the father, and then shoots the father. only to discover that, in fact, they were telling the truth. I remember as a kid, it shocked me, although, as an adult, it doesn't get to me anywhere near as much because I've seen a lot worse shit. Now, as for Joffrey, he just comes across as a spoiled little brat, and he kills people for his own entertainment, basically. He's a horrible person, and he's not likable in any way. Now to weigh the pros and cons of these villains. Personally, I think the pros are, they give you something to hate. They give you something to look forward to when they get their comeuppance. They make you happy if they die. And in some ways, I think this is the best way to do a villain, because it's basically giving them what their job is for. They're created as a villain, someone who is against the main character. With the exception of times when villains are the main protagonist, but that's another topic for another day. The cons, I would say, is they genuinely make you angry. For instance, Joffrey on Game of Thrones really pissed me off throughout the entire time. But I think that means he did his job. The same could be said for, say, Gustavo Fring from Breaking Bad. Although they do give him some sympathetic moments with some flashbacks and stuff, he's still a very hateable person. But anyway, I think that's all I really have to say about villains today. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and this has been Fugitive Red Eye, and you have a great day.